Welcome to this re-recording of session 3 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started this series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 3rd of January. Today we'll be looking at Genesis 8 to 11 and Psalm 3. But so far in Genesis, we've read about the creation of the earth and humanity. Adam and Eve were given a mandate to spread God's order across the earth, but they chose to do things their own way. This started the fall and led to a downward spiral of death and violence. And humanity continued to pollute itself with wickedness, creating chaos where God had intended order. This reached its peak when some human women tried to mate with spiritual beings to create immortal spiritual human children. At this, God decided that things had gone too far and chose to undo the work he'd done. Picking Noah to carry on the human race as it was meant to be, God sent a flood to wipe out the rest of the humanity. We pick up today with Noah and his family in an ark on the flood. So let's jump in with today's reading, Genesis 8 to 11. The flood waters reside. Noah, his family, and the animals are once again on dry land. Noah offers God a sacrifice, and God gives Noah his blessing. The chaos that humanity had created had been washed away, and God had restored it to good, and it looks like humanity is once again working with God as they should be. God encourages Noah and his family with the original mandate he gave Adam and Eve. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on this earth and multiply in it. Genesis 9 verse 7. Compare with Genesis 1 verse 28. We also get this first example of God making a covenant with his people. In church circles, the word covenant is often over-spiritualized. In this ancient context, a covenant was simply a legally binding contract. But don't let that undercut the importance of this moment. The creator of heaven and earth is willing to commit himself to his people. In this example, he will never again wipe out all creation with a flood. But the effects of the fall begin to show themselves again. Noah gets drunk and his son Ham takes advantage of this. From the text, it's clear that something worse than taking a look at his dad's naked body has happened. Later on in Leviticus, we will read that uncovering a man's nakedness meant sleeping with his wife. This could suggest that Ham was making a play at being the leader of the family by sleeping with his father's wife. Very different times indeed. If Canaan was the child that came from Ham's betrayal, then this is perhaps why the writer emphasizes that Ham is the father of Canaan and why Noah curses Canaan. Either way, what is clear is that the brokenness of humanity is still very much an issue. We then speed forward as one family becomes many. The author begins listing the various descendants of Noah. But these aren't random people. Each of these names represents a different tribe or nation. In this list, we see all the different people groups that were known at the time. One name that is given special mention is Nimrod. This guy is an incredible hunter, but he also begins to form the first empire. He starts his empire in Babel, which later will become Babylon, and builds many more cities. One important one is Nineveh in the land of Assyria. Anyone who's familiar with their Old Testament will know that these two cities, Babylon and Nineveh, along with Egypt and the Philistines, have a look at Genesis 10 verse 6 and then 11 to 13, will become quite important as future enemies of God's people. The issue is, when God told humanity to be fruitful and multiply, he wanted them to spread out in their creativity. He wanted to see different tribes and cultures pop up, each looking slightly different but all united in their humanity. Empires do away with this. They aim to spread one homogenized culture wherever they go, removing that individual identity. This continues to the point where people on Earth are developing new technologies such as brick, someone had to develop it, and building great cities. They decide to build a giant tower. This may not seem significant, but during this time, mountains were where heaven meets earth. These giant towers were like man-made mountains. In other words, they were building a tower to make their own way back to heaven. God knows that at this rate, humanity would spend the rest of eternity working together to take back their immortality at force. There was no chance for a relationship between humanity and God when they were like this. So God divides up humanity into different groups of people with different languages. No longer able to communicate with one another easily, and now part of separate groups, humanity would now focus on dealing with one another rather than on openly challenging God. Not that they were ever a threat. It's not made clear in this passage, but later on in Deuteronomy 32 verse 8, we see that God actually disinherited the nations here. By this we mean that he decided he would no longer be their God. Instead, he puts angels in charge of these nations, and these angels, these spiritual beings, would deal with the nations so he didn't have to. The fall is now complete. Not only did humanity reject God in Genesis 3, but they showed their willingness to pollute themselves in Genesis 4 to 6. And now they've brought God to the point where he would rather break up his own kingdom, his own earth, than let them continue as they were. So what's next? Well, we get a brief glimpse at the end of Genesis 11. When God wiped out humanity with the flood, he chose one family to carry on his purpose. Now that God has disinherited or disowned humanity, he turns to a new family to fulfill his purpose, a family that didn't yet exist, but would all start with one man named Abram. But that's Genesis 8 to 11. Now let's look at Psalm 3. This psalm is attributed to King David when he had to flee from his son Absalom. That's 2 Samuel 15 to 19. The idea is that either David wrote this psalm or someone else wrote it as they meditated on this story. A poem working through the emotions David must have been feeling at the time. This psalm is categorized as a lament psalm, which makes up over a third of all psalms. Biblical lament is whenever a person takes their pains, hurts, and frustrations before God. It tends to include 4 steps: turning to God, bringing the complaint before God, making a request of God, and then declaring trust in God. We see this in the structure of Psalm 3. Here is a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. But we start with verses 1 to 2, the complaint. Verse 3, declaring trust in God. Verses 4 to 5, remembering what he has done before. Verse 6, declaring trust in God. Verse 7, asking God to rescue them and defeat their enemies. And then verse 8, declaring trust in God. This psalm was typically sung in the morning. It opens with a reminder that sometimes it seems like we are surrounded by opposition. Opposition that is declaring there is no hope for us. The response to this is to declare the truth of who God is. We can support this with reminding ourselves of his goodness to us in the past. We do not need to be afraid because God has answered us and sustained us in the past, and he will do it again. The psalmist invites God into this pain and struggle to rescue them and strike down this opposition. Finally, the psalmist ends, challenging the lies their enemies have spoken over them. In Psalm 3 verse 2, the opponent declared there is no salvation for them. But in Psalm 3 verse 8, they responded that salvation belongs to the Lord. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.